Welcome to this webinar, which has been organized by students of the Center for Criminology and Justice, which is known as the CCJ Forum. So they do organize various kinds of activities from time to time, whether it is some kind of talk or a film show. So this, as part of their activity, they thought of a series of webinars. And the first one that they have thought of is called Prisons and the Pandemic, which is an extremely relevant topic in the current situation. I think most of you are aware that just a couple of days back, there has been a situation where more than 100 people in prisons in the Arthur Road jail in Mumbai have tested corona positive. And this is, I hope, not the beginning of a series of such situations in other prisons, because if that would happen, it would really spell some kind of a disaster. Given that background, I think today's talk is all the more relevant. We have a very distinguished panel with us. I am very happy that I have had very close association with all four of them. Three of them are from TISS. They have been all students in the Center for Criminology and Justice. I have taught two of them, and one person has been a close colleague. And then the person who's not from TISS is also somebody with whom I have worked very closely for the last few years. So let me just straight away go on to introducing our panelists today. We have Krupa Shah. She is associated with Prayas for the last more than 2 decades, nearly 3 decades now. She is been working in Bharuch unit of Prayas in criminal justice system, in police as well as in prisons and rehabilitation. She also has had a lot of experience in terms of working at the policy level as well as on research issues. Welcome, Krupa. It's so nice to have you here and formally introduce you. I don't think I've done that ever before.
Thank you.
Then we have Cecilia Davis, who is an independent consultant working with prisons in Karnataka. She's also been around in this field for nearly 2 decades now. I think she's from the 2000 batch, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah. And now she has been working in Bangalore and Karnataka, and there's also an informal group called Prisons Forum that she has initiated in Karnataka and has been actively working on these issues. The third person I'd like to introduce is Sugandha Shankar, who is working with the CHRI for many, many years. And she's also somebody who's done a lot of work in the area of prisons, particularly in terms of prisoners' rights, through various research and policy advocacy instruments. Welcome. The fourth person in the panel today is my colleague in the Center for Criminology and Justice in the School of Social Work at TISS, Dr. Asha Mukundan, who has also had many, many years, decades of experience of working with the juvenile justice system, and in particular children in conflict with law. And when this webinar was being thought of, the students felt that we should not limit the discussion only to the situation in prisons, but we should also look at institutions for children, for example, or other kinds of custodial institutions. And therefore, we are very happy to have Dr. Asha with us today. So with that kind of an introduction, I think we can start by a little bit of a background about the current situation as it is developing. So I think all of us, or maybe many of us, are aware that the situation in custodial institutions, particularly in prisons, came into limelight when the Supreme Court filed a suo motu PIL, which is called the Writ Petition Civil number 1 of 2020, which was filed by the Chief Justice's Court on the 16th of March, where he served a notice to all the states and union territories, asking them what steps they were going to take in view of the fact that the corona pandemic could actually hit prisons as well. In response to the notice, the state governments and the union territories filed their affidavits, and the Supreme Court also appointed Dushyant Dave, senior counsel in the Supreme Court, as the amicus curiae in this case. And then once the affidavits were filed, the Supreme Court perused through those documents, and then it heard the matter again on 23rd of March and passed a series of directions. Main among them was that it passed an order that in every state has to constitute a high-powered committee. The high-powered committee will consist of the chairman or chairperson of the State Legal Services Authority, the Home Secretary of the state government, and the DG prisons. And this three-member panel will identify the categories of prisoners who could be released either on bail or on parole, depending on whether they were under trials or convicted prisoners. The court also passed an order that the Under Trial Review Committee, which is the body which was set up as a result of another PIL many years back in 2013, had passed an order of a district level under trial committee, which should review cases of under trials who can be released on personal bond. And there are 14 such categories of prisoners who could be considered for release under this by the UTRC. The UTRC usually meets once in 3 months. In this order, the Supreme Court said that the UTRC should meet every week so that more and more categories of prisoners could be identified and they could be released. These were two main directions. Another important one was that there is a judgment called the Arnesh Kumar versus State of Bihar judgment, under which if somebody is if somebody is charged with an offense where the maximum sentence is less than 7 years, instead of arresting the person should only be charged with the offense and asked to be present in court. Now, this particular order of the Supreme Court is not being implemented in most states in the country. And so the Supreme Court again reiterated that the Arnesh Kumar judgment should be followed. The other important thing in this petition that the Supreme Court had asked was that similar steps need to be taken when it came to juveniles, children in the juvenile justice system, especially children in conflict with law, and that they should also be released at the earliest. So these were broadly the kind of directions that were issued on the first hearing. Subsequent hearing, they passed another order where they ensured that transportation of prisoners being released should be done safely so that they can reach home. So these are broadly the kind of orders that were passed. So from 23rd March onwards, various state governments immediately constituted the high-powered committees and they started releasing prisoners. But unfortunately, the current situation, if you see, the number of prisoners that could have been released, that has not happened. Most of the high-powered committees have been rather, conservative in terms of deciding the categories of prisoners who could be released. And therefore, the overall reduction of overcrowding, to my estimate, is not more than 10%. It's somewhere in the region of 5 to 10% of the prisoners who have been released, and therefore it doesn't really affect overcrowding to an extent that social distancing becomes possible. And the Arthur Road incident is a prime example of the fact that because social distancing is not possible, you have so many people who are tested positive. And mind you, 150 people were tested, and from that 103 have tested positive. So, which means that the percentage of people testing positive is very high. So this is one reality. There is another PIL which was taken suo motu by the Supreme Court, under which it passed an order that children in conflict with law in various observation homes should be immediately released to the care of their families. And I think that has substantively reduced the population of children in observation homes across the country. So this is the broad background. One more factor I want to bring in is the role of civil society organizations, which has been quite active. There are a number of organizations which have gone to court. There are advocates who have gone to court trying to see that the category of persons being released is increased. There is a national forum on prison reforms, of which some of us are part of, which has filed an intervention application in the Supreme Court in that same matter. And there are also applications filed by advocates in the Bombay High Court in this matter. So we are in the middle of a developing situation where some high-powered committees have done far better than many other high-powered committees. For example, Delhi High-Powered Committee has been more proactive. Karnataka also, I think, has comparatively speaking done better. And some other state high-powered committees have been not so active. So in this background, it would be very interesting to see what has been the impact of the COVID crisis on prisoners and their families. I think as well as on custodial populations like children's institutions. So this is broadly what we are going to discuss today. I'd like to open up the discussion maybe with I don't think the organizers have given me any order in which I should invite the speakers. They have given an order? Okay. Asha, can you help me with that? Who's the first to go?
So the first one to go is Cecilia, ma'am.
Okay, fine. Okay. So I request Cecilia Davis to give her opening remarks. So what we'll do is we'll have one round of introductory remarks by all the four speakers, followed by probably a round of questions, and then again the panelists will come. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Hi everybody. I'm Cecilia, and I'm a social worker as well as a lawyer, and I work independently in the prisons in Karnataka. So just to, I've been asked to expand on what the existing condition of prisoners is in this COVID-19 situation, and also what is the situation vis-a-vis access to their families, access to legal aid, and one particular focus also being women prisoners. So just to, Sir has already given us a background on, about what exactly has been happening at the Supreme Court level. But to just, bring to light what is the kind of impact that this entire situation has had practically on the prisoners lodged within the prison, both in the light of the Supreme Court judgment, as also in the light of the complete unpreparedness of the government and the administration. So to just put this in perspective, it's important to understand, like I will begin with the example of Karnataka. Karnataka was one of the first governments that gave an order for the prisons to shut doors for any kinds of visits, either by families or by lawyers. They went into that pretty early. Even before the nationwide lockdown, I knew prisons were shut and we were not able to access our clients. Now, the good part about that shutdown is that the disease did not sort of get in much earlier. It would have been much more disastrous if it had gotten much earlier, because everybody was absolutely unprepared. But having said that, the negative aspect of the same thing is that they shut down access to families, access to lawyers, which are basically lifeline for any prisoner in any part of the country. And once they shut down that lifeline, there was absolutely no alternative arrangement that was made for the prisoners in the existing situation to have that kind of a contact, which essentially means that there's such a total cutoff from the outside world. It just means that there is immense pressure as far as the mental and physical well-being of the prisoners are concerned. Okay, and that's having a huge impact. In fact, going ahead and talking about the Supreme Court judgment and the high-powered committees, like Sir mentioned, some states were quick to act, some states, they took time to act. But it was, as much as the Supreme Court has preliminary guidelines, we appreciate the fact that, yes, they took suo motu cognizance and all of it. Yet, I must admit that the Supreme Court has fallen short in the role that was expected of it. Because if you look at the guidelines that the Supreme Court has been giving, and if you look at how the high powered committees have functioned, the Supreme Court has failed to really look at how this is going to operationalize at a practical level. You know, it's like as if they forgot what this is going to mean for the last person who's going to be in the line out there in the prison. And the implications of that are, I'll just take very simple examples. Like, for example, when they spoke about, you know, not just the Supreme Court, but if you look at a lot of other committee recommendations also, they kept saying the prison authorities must ensure social distancing. And to be very honest, that seemed like an absolute joke, because I don't know, in all probability also, because none of these people who have actually passed these orders, they rarely go to the prison to see what social distancing would mean there. You know, it's impossible. We know from the prison statistics year after year after year that irrespective of which category of prisons we have in our country, overcrowding has been a persistent problem, you know. And the result of that overcrowding is, it's a very commonly known fact that the prison authorities have not been able to contain even simple skin diseases. And we are talking about a pandemic which, you know, even outside people are not aware about. And they kept saying, you know, social distancing. The second example is, please ensure that they wash hands. If you visit prisons all across the country, this being summer season, even in non-summer seasons, water is a huge issue. It's easy to say wash hands, but the question is, wash hands with what? You know, I know for a fact that even prisons all across Karnataka, for that matter, washing and bathing is like a distant dream. Even drinking water is a struggle, particularly during the summer months. And I know there are, you know, prisons across the country have the situation that they face very, very regularly. Yeah. So coming to some of the you know, Supreme Court, talking about the Supreme Court judgment and asking for the release of prisoners, basically in saying in setting that benchmark at 7 years, the court has not addressed about what happens to the other under trials who are there, who are languishing. And as far as the under trial review committees are concerned, like CHRI's report itself reveals that there are several under trial review committees across this country that has practically been close to dysfunctional. Yeah, and with that, there's a large category of prisoners who have been left out of release. And it's the legal aid lawyers who are now able to access prisoners, and they are supposed to help. But we also know that in the existing scenario, there have been courts that have mentioned that we will take up only urgent matters. Now, I don't know how the court really views bail. If bail is not a very urgent matter, considering that it is a question of an individual's right to life and liberty, I don't know what else the court is considering in terms of being urgent. And there itself, for lawyers who have had to, the courts have made video conferencing option available in order to argue matters, right? But my colleagues here have mentioned that that has become such a huge challenge because the courts have not been equipped at all to deal with the kind of load that is coming in. And there has been no effort made to really systematize it. You know, even in terms of appearance of clients at the initial stages, the kind of confusion that existed at the sessions courts, and you know, the clients came to the court, they were asked to go back and say they need not appear. And then when the lawyer appeared before the court said, the client hasn't appeared, we are going to issue a warrant. And there was absolutely utter confusion. And the reason for this confusion, I wouldn't blame it all on the COVID-19 situation. Of course, yes, it is a pandemic that has hit and taken us unawares, but it's also reflective of the fact that even during the normal times, the kind of systems that we have falls so short of the required standards. So as far as coming to, let's say, the convicts matters and, the question of parole, I know from personal experience of having worked with several clients, and many of them being women right now, that they were asked to apply for parole. This thing of whatever initiative is taken, I remember all petitions that were mentioned at the Supreme Court said that whatever is done, even if it is release or parole or whatever it is done, it needs to be done with the consent of the prisoner. Yeah, be it an under trial or be it a convict. And that has been absolutely disregarded, because I know that here in Karnataka, all convicts eligible for parole were asked to apply, and many of them did not want to because they knew that their families will not be able to afford surety. Nonetheless, when the parole orders did come, they were compelled to leave, except those who stood their ground and said, no, there's no way we're going to do it. Now, in terms of compliance for parole, the department said their family members have to come to the nearest district prison to give in the relevant papers and to pay a surety of 1,500 rupees. And clients of mine have had to travel a distance of 100 kilometers to reach the nearest prison in a situation where there is no transport facility available whatsoever. And it did not stop here. When the prisoners were being sent out on parole, they were told, come back at so-and-so date to the central prison that you are lodged in and give us an extension letter. Okay? Whereas the easiest thing to do would have been to tell the client, we will coordinate this through the nearest police station, because that would have been an easy point of contact. Yes, in the rural areas, that also would have been difficult, but at least they would have been able to find some means to be able to reach the nearest police station, else the police could have reached out to them. Yeah. So those have been the challenges. And transportation, though there were clear guidelines from the Supreme Court saying transportation to prisoners have to be provided, I know that has not been the case. Families have had to arrange for transportation. They were stopped at every checkpost. And there were so many instances when I had to take the call and tell the person concerned that, this person has been released on parole and they need to reach home, else there will be a lot of legal implications for the concerned person. Now, this is with a handful of people that I have been able to do. So one can only imagine what is the situation with the larger number of prisoners who have been released and what challenges they have faced. So that's as far as access to legal aid and the legal formalities are concerned. Now, when we come to the issue of women prisoners, here, as the question of consent becomes all the more important, because we should not forget the fact that there are several women prisoners who are not accepted back to their homes. And there has been a blatant disregard as far as that has been concerned. And even I know colleagues of mine who have tried on various grounds requesting the courts to release women prisoners with children, but the courts haven't been too favorable as far as that is concerned. And with cutting off communication, the last time when there was another platform that we were discussing this entire issue, we were talking about, telephone calls. A normal duration for a call is around 5 to 6 minutes, and it's not more than twice a week for every prisoner. So what the prisoner usually does is puts in the number for the advocate and a number for another member of the family. Now, in a situation where visits from the family have not been possible for more than 1.5, we'll soon be coming to 2 months. There has been no effort whatsoever to increase the duration of the calls. In an age where technology is not so difficult to arrange and access, it is really sad to see that these arrangements are not being made, which means within the limited time of 5 or 6 minutes that the prisoner has, they are compelled to finish an entire conversation about their own well-being, and many of them are extremely anxious about the well-being of their family members. And because it's a question not just of asking how are you, it's a question of how the family is able to sustain most of them come from such poor economic backgrounds that even a single meal for some of the families is like almost impossible in this situation. And these kinds of concerns weighing down on the minds of the prisoners is bound to affect their mental health, and that is bound to move on into their physical health also. Yeah. And overall, if you look at what the condition of the prisons has been and of the government largely, one, there has been lack of absolute preparedness. Yeah, there have been only stopgap arrangements completely, and the suggestions that are coming from up there without actually understanding what the ground level realities across the prisons are. There have been no alternate arrangements whatsoever. And like, for example, taking the example of Maharashtra, just around 5,000 prisoners being released when more than 11,000 were eligible. That in itself is like a gross violation. It is a gross violation. And if there is no concrete action and very specific action, and this would not be an exaggeration, but we need a prison specific action that needs to come out, and where people need to be, because every prison has a very different culture. Every prison has its own set of challenges. Yes, there can be very broad suggestions that come in, but every prison specific action has to be taken. The worst thing that could have been done, and which has been done here in Karnataka, because the government in response to a particular petition said that we have reduced overcrowding. So how have you reduced overcrowding? We have shifted certain number of prisoners from prison A to prison B, forgetting that your entire social distancing goes for a toss because you are now overcrowding that prison. And admission of new prisoners. In Bangalore, we've had an instance where there was a mob in a red zone, and around 50 people, I think, were arrested. And the first thing that the police or the government should have thought of was not to send them to the prison, because these people are already from the red zone, which means it is quite likely that they are asymptomatic, yet in a while they may turn positive. And sadly, they had them shifted to the neighboring district prison, where 2 people among them turned positive. And after that, as an afterthought, they were shifted back into an educational institution close by. Now, that kind of complete disconnect between the key players within the government, the police, the courts, the prisons, that is the kind of impact that is having is shown in what is happening right now in Arthur Road Jail. So that's as far as the conditions are concerned. And yeah, I guess I leave it to the other speakers to continue, unless you want me to add anything else.
Second round then, yeah.
Sure.
I think I have to mute. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks, Cecilia. I think you've given us an overview of the situation that has been caused as a result of the pandemic with respect to prisons in the country. We will now, I think some of the things that you have highlighted, I'll just quickly flag them so that we can come back to it later. One is the important issue of mulaqats, because mulaqats have been suspended, and what is going to be the impact of that, despite the fact that phone calls are allowed supposedly, but everybody doesn't have equal access to it. Another important point you have brought out is the issue of the courts are almost at a standstill now. Except for very urgent matters, nothing is being heard. And so even regular bail applications are now pending. And this is going to increase the delays in courts over a period of time. Then you've talked about the red tape when it comes to releasing prisoners on parole and all the problems that are associated with it. The opaqueness of the high-powered committees, that ordinary citizens are not able to access the HPCs with cases which could be considered. It is somebody working at the top, and nobody knows how to approach this committee. And finally, to deal with the issue of overcrowding, what could be done? One of the questions which I would like to open up later on is whether temporary jails can be started under the Prisons Act. So these are some of the issues. Thank you once again. I'll now just, who's next in the, sorry about this.
Sir, it's Krupa ma'am.
It's Krupa ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Krupa, can you please go? I think she's network is gone.
Yes, sir. Ma'am is having
Are
a
you
network
there?
issue. Yes, sir.
I think her network is gone. So can we then ask Dr. Asha to speak, and then Krupa can come back?
Yes, sir. We can go with it. We'll deal with Krupa ma'am about the issue, technical part.
Yeah. So I think we can have Asha speak.
I think next on the list is Sugandha, right?
No, next on the list
Asha
is
ma'am.
you.
Me?
And
Okay,
then
all right.
Sugandha comes last.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
We can try and get Krupa back, but in the meanwhile, then Asha can start. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for having me as a panelist. And the topic given to me is status on children correctional homes and children protection home with respect to pandemic. Well, actually today morning itself, we were preparing a note for the Bombay High Court on trying to understand what is the scenario. And that became quite easy because, somewhat what I've put up in my note out there is something that I'm going to speak out here as well. Just like Professor Raghavan spoke about the suo motu writ petition, I begin this to say that there was a suo motu writ petition civil number 2 of 2020, which looked into the COVID-19 situation of children's protection home. And some of the highlights, very brief highlights that I'll put across, which will then make it easier for me to speak about what the current scenario or status is. So they have put down certain guidelines for different kinds of stakeholders. So for CWC, they have said that the CWC has to have special online sittings or video sessions and look at different and consider measures that may be taken to prevent children residing in the children's home, open shelters, adoption agencies. They were talking of gatekeeping of preventive measures needed to be considered, and families should be counseled to ensure that institutionalization is the last resort. Focus should be on prevention of separation. So these are the words that are used by the High Court, and I want to emphasize on that. Child Welfare Committee to monitor cases telephonically for children who have been sent back to their families and coordinate with district child protection district child protection committees and foster care and adoption committees. As far as possible, online help desk to be set up and support systems for queries has to be established at the state level and at the district level is what is the understanding. It is important to, and they have given a lot of emphasis on violence, including gender, sexual and gender-based violence. The entire note for every stakeholder has asked them to take special cognizance of this kind of scenario that one is anticipating. And they have said that the Child Welfare Committee must constantly keep in touch with the institutions through video conferencing, WhatsApp, and telephonically to ensure any form of prevent any kind of violence. For the JJB, like Dr. Raghavan also said, they said that release the children out on bail. They've also talked about video conferencing and online sittings to be held to have speedy disposal. For governments, they have said that all the instructions that we are putting out in this order has to be circulated. Everybody has to reach. You have to look at disaster and emergency situation. You'll have to have the district child protection unit to work on rotational basis. Develop a system to organize trained volunteers who would step in to care for children when the need arises. They have also looked at saying that you set up your model rules should be looked at very strictly. and counseling has to be made available in the home. Either it has to be online or telephonically. They have told the state government to ensure adequate budgetary allocation to meet all the costs, and also provide face masks, soaps, disinfectants such as bleach and alcohol-based disinfectants, and ensure that enough food, drinking water, and other necessities as clean clothes, menstrual hygiene products are provided. For children's institutions specifically, they have said that you have to spread a lot of awareness in these institutions. You should reduce the number of people entering into the CCIs, that is the children's institutions. Meetings should be held through video conferencing, or it should just be rescheduled if it is not very important. Distancing should be important and it should be maintained. And they've also said like spaces should be scheduled at 25% participation, and the schedule developed to ensure more social distancing. They said you have to wash items using the hot water and dry items completely. And, like Cecilia has just now spoken, so many of these things is something that even I would be speaking about. Ensure adequate and clean toilets, maintain clean and hygienic kitchen conditions. They've also said that avoid watching, reading, listening, and discussing too much about COVID-19, and persuade children to divert their attention to other issues, topics, and they should be doing something else because it can be very upsetting to just listen to this. And try and have a different kind of routine, because nowadays school and all is closed. So these are the basic highlights of what the Supreme Court guidelines have been. Now, in this context, let's see what the reality is, or how it, it's panning out. If I have to talk about Maharashtra specifically, we have around 1,100 children's residential institutions, that is CCIs, that we're talking about. That's the biggest number in the whole of India. The other states might have maximum 500, but I don't know any state which has even 500 children's institutions, but 1,000 children's institutions are there in Maharashtra. And before the COVID-19 breakout, we had approximately 20,000 children staying in these 1,100, rough institutions. As soon as the pandemic broke out, 10,000 children were sent back home. And now the recent figures say that there are approximately 10,000 children residing in these homes. Now, the thing is that it also goes back to say that we have always been talking to the government to say that, many of these CCIs are being treated as hostels. And, we need to curb this, we need to do gatekeeping. Because every April, May, parents usually come and take the children home. So we used to tell them that that's the best time to do gatekeeping, because that if their parents have taken them back home, they may not be needing a children's institution. So today, if there are 10,000 children in the institution, it is these children who are actually in need of care and protection, because they could not be sent home because there was no one else to take care of them. So they are the real children in need of care and protection. So now if there are new entries, so we have to, we are telling them that now when this lockdown opens up, we have to be extremely careful about gatekeeping. And just because we have sent them back home, that doesn't mean we have to take them back inside. We have to do a fresh, social investigation report and look whether they are really needing this kind of support. Because somewhere along the line, the children's institutions also have become a big industry. There are people want to take them back home. Institutions will be very happy to take them back, because it's also about grant and aid. Per child, per month, it's 2,000 rupees. So, if you lose out on 10 children, you're losing out on quite an amount of money. So, they want more number of children in their institution. So, we cannot be now risking something like this to keep these institutions open. But before that, I must really say that till date, we have not heard of a single incident where this of some negative news about children getting infected with COVID-19. so far. So I think they have done a pretty good job of containing it in the institutions, and let's keep our fingers crossed that this continues and things remain there, because that's the number of children in the institutions leaving these 4-5 districts of Mumbai, Pune, Thane and all. The rest of the districts, I don't think there are so many children in the institutions, is what we are getting to hear. We are also saying that now that the Supreme Court had asked that every, the Supreme Court has put the onus on the Juvenile Justice High Court Committee to monitor and ensure that there is compliance of this Supreme Court orders that have been passed. So the Juvenile Justice Committee is calling for reports, and they're mainly quantitative reports. So it's all about numbers. How many visits have you done? How many children are there? How many affected? How many good? So it's mainly numbers that one is getting. And in these numbers, all seems fine. But we don't have any qualitative report so far, because what we are given to understand is staff is working on a very, very, difficult staff who's staying outside the institution are not coming in. So the institution is run by those residential people who are staying within the institution. So that's quite that's very little, that's a small number of people who are staying there. Also, admissions have not stopped completely. There are cases that are still coming into the institution, and it's pretty stressful for the institution staff at the moment, because every new case is a new case, and they're too stressed with cases coming in. The JJ Act always spoke about a reception unit. Now is the time that they have set up a reception unit, because they really felt the need for it. But the challenge is that, when you have 1 or 2 children who are coming into the institution, you can't keep them in the reception unit. After one day, they're getting so restless that you have to keep them for 14 days in the reception unit. Now that's not possible, because the reception unit has no facility. The TV is in the main counter, the playing stuff is in the main counter. So keeping them for 14 days, they themselves are getting restless. Medical test also is getting difficult to do, because there are no in-house staff in the institution. Now there are no caretakers also who can take children to the hospital to get a test done and come. And getting a test done is a one-day task. You have to go to the hospital, you have to go and stand the line. So there's no priority being given to children's institutions per se that way. So it's a big task, and staff is really stressed out with new children that are coming in. And recently there was a case where, many children in conflict with law was brought in, and one didn't know how to handle such a case. We are saying that you have to come out with some plans on how we are going to do gatekeeping post COVID-19 or post this lockdown period. When we are talking of bail, there is a lot of, the institution staff is very clear that release most of the children out on bail. Now, the problem is not there in district places, because district places, there are no children. Others also, there were no children in conflict with law in the institutions. Only it was the CNCP children that were there in the institutions. And now CNCP has really reduced. Like I said, it's reduced by half the numbers. But there are children, there are demands coming from these cities saying that at least those who are there out there in the observation home, release them out on bail. The question is, are they safer inside the institution, or are they safer outside? So it's a very mixed feeling. The places where they stay are slums and not, cluster areas. So is it safe to send them to cluster areas, or are they safe here? Here also the number of children in these districts are quite high. So you're saying that, and they are more vulnerable. Here there are 100 children, there are at least one family with one child. But whatever it is, so there is this thing whether you need to release them or no, and that debate is going on. Though the Supreme, it's easy to have a suo motu, but orders, but the implementation challenges are quite a bit. Even now that the Juvenile Justice Committee is very closely monitoring most of these numbers. but we are also getting to know that these numbers that are being provided by the institution, we are completely depending on the institution to give us numbers. So the institution is giving us very good numbers, and we do not know how much to believe those numbers, because a few surprise visits in some of these institutions have shown that the institution is closed. There were just 3 children in the institution. The superintendent has taken those 3 children, taken him to his house in his house, and closed the institution because it was not viable to keep the institution open with 4 staff, 3 children, 1 superintendent, and a kitchen running. So he took them home, closed the institution. But when he's giving data, he's actually giving the data saying that there are 3 children the institution is running, because it's also about the it's also about the funds to come in to the institution. So we are saying that maybe on-site inspection is now needed, because if there is already there is an institution running there, then maybe 3-4 institutions can be clapped together if there is a issue of economics. But this practice of then taking the child home and then giving data to say that the institution is open, I don't know how it will work in the long run. We are also suggesting that maybe there should be some committee, but again, we will have to see those things. Now the Supreme Court has said that you have to have online sessions and all. Where is internet facility in these institutions? They're in such remote places. Forget the internet, they don't even have a computer there. So it was quite difficult. In fact, even now in most of these institutions, taking group sessions have become a very big challenge. We can't even sitting outside taking sessions with children within the home. So they are just there are 5 children, they're just stuck there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Asha, can you now wind up, because time is
so that's about that. So then there are issues where DCPU, who are the ground level people who are supposed to go to these institutions, they are only being given reimbursement for public transport, not using your own vehicle. So what we're saying is, this is the time when you have to use your there's no public transport. So they find it very difficult, and their payment is hardly some 8,000 to 15,000. So you can't expect them to, spend from their own pocket also. So those are some policy level issues that need to be looked at. There are lots of, so every time the Supreme Court gives a guideline, the state government immediately puts a notification and then releases the notification, and they'll say, we have complied by the Supreme Court decision. But how is it functioning on the field is not something like the Supreme Court has said, set an online help desk. The government has said, set it up. They have set up with 2 people and they've set up a help. But how does the help desk function? So on paper, everything is there. But in reality, how is it functioning? Who's supposed to function are not things that are really, available. So, so even when one is talking about washing hands and things like that, so washing with hot water, these are not realities that we are still getting used to. But so far, so good. In the homes, everything has been fine, is what the status is.
Thank you so much. You've raised some very important issues about the gap between implementation and the policy. So if you read the Supreme Court directions, you feel good. But when you go to the ground level, you see that there are a lot of gaps. But what you're also saying that overall the situation is not as bad as it could have been compared. Firstly, the overcrowding issue has been sorted out. And it was anyway not a big issue except in big cities. But now the situation is very much under control. So with that, I would now request Krupa to speak. Krupa, is she now back in connection?
Yes, sir. She's back. Hello, Krupa, ma'am.
But her image has again got fixed.
It's still the network issue, sir. It has gotten freeze. We can then go to the next panelist.
Okay.
She can close her video and only speak on the mic.
Yeah, I think that might work. That might work. Will you tell her that?
Yes, sir. We have texted her to only use the audio part.
Okay. So now, in the meanwhile, I can ask Sugandha.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So Sugandha, if you could.
Yeah. CHRI has been working on prison reforms for almost 2 decades now, and we've been mainly working on strengthening the prison oversight mechanisms like Board of Visitors and under trial review committees. And we've also extensively worked on legal aid reform and on the repatriation of foreign national prisoners. Today, I've been asked to speak on the status of bail and parole and the human rights violations inside prisons during this time, and to give an overview of the comparative analysis of prison policies in different countries during this time. Supreme Court, in its earlier orders in the re-inhuman writ petition, which was filed in 2013, which Dr. Raghavan also mentioned, they've been concerned about overcrowding in prisons for a long time, and they consider that as an issue which involves human rights violation, right? So we've been tracking during this time. We've been tracking the number of actual releases, because there've been claims by different state governments on how the number of releases could help in easing out overcrowding. And if we overall look at the scenario, we've been tracking this, and you can find this information on our website. I'm just putting that link on our on the group chat. Yeah. So if you overall look at it, there are about 12 states and UTs which have released less than 1,000 prisoners. And this includes medium and big size states like Andhra Pradesh, Assam, Bihar, Kerala, Odisha. And I think among them, Bihar is the only state which has not released a single prisoner, claiming that they do not have overcrowding. But we know that these overcrowding figures are often misleading. And there would be individual prisons which would be overcrowded. Also, the point right now is that it's not about filling the capacity of the prisons to the maximum and to say, oh, we have 100% overcrowding, so 100% occupancy level, so therefore we are not overcrowded. But the point right now is to see that the number of prisoners are reduced to a level where they're able to implement the precautions and maintain safe distance among prisoners. So Bihar has only relied on transferring prisoners from one prison to the another, and which is, they haven't really taken it up in the right spirit as the Supreme Court had directed. There are about 8 states which have released more than 1,000. So Madhya Pradesh being the highest, they've released more than 6,000 prisoners. And Haryana comes on the second position with more than 4,000 prisoners being released. And Maharashtra has released more than 2,500 prisoners as of today. But overall, when we look at the occupancy rates, there was an estimate to reduce the occupancy level by 14.3%. But like Dr. Raghavan mentioned initially, it has only come down to 5.7%. This has been based on the reports that have been there in the media. Haryana has done pretty well. They have been able to reduce the occupancy rate to almost 23%. And against the estimated of 16%, which is good. On the other hand, is Odisha, where they expected to reduce the occupancy rate by 9%, but they've only managed to do 0.2%. So there's a long way to go in releasing these in releasing prisoners and easing overcrowding in prisons. And if we come to the reasons as to why this has happened, and what Dr. Raghavan also mentioned in the beginning, that they've restricted themselves only to the Supreme Court mandate, and they've not really gone beyond But in few states, there are good practices. We see in Delhi, we see that, initially they decided on a limited categories of cases, but then they realized that this will not serve a purpose. So, in the next HPC meeting, they increased their scope little bit and included some more categories. So you can clearly see that there's been application of mind, and they are sort of doing what is required. But many states, they've just been limited on the Supreme Court mandate. CHRI has prepared a note to assist the high-powered committees on the different categories of cases that they could consider for release. So one of them being that if someone, if a convict who has completed his sentence but is still in prison for non-payment of fine, or someone whose sentence is about to get completed in the next 2 months. So these are the people who should be released, and especially at this time. Also, all the categories of the under trial review committees that are mandated to be reviewed. We've seen in the past when we monitored their functioning is that they only look at, say 436A category, or, where bail has been granted and the person has not been able to furnish surety. So 1 or 2 categories, whereas they're supposed to look at the 14 categories which have been directed by the Supreme Court. So I mean, we don't know how they are functioning at the moment. But now they've been asked to do these meetings every week. So we are hoping that something might come out positive out of this. On the issue that Cecilia was mentioning about video conferencing and the problems that are attached to it, we also completely, I completely agree with Cecilia, and we have a fundamental issue of doing trials on VC particularly. And we understand the situation, what we are in, and video conferencing seems to be a practical solution where people can't be taken to court physically. But they need to ensure that there are certain safeguards that are in place while doing video conferencing. So, for example, there should be a separate time for the lawyer and client interaction before the hearing, where the person is able to speak and give instruction to the lawyer. There should be, these video conferencing proceedings should not take place in front of a police of a prison staff, so that if they, the prisoner is able to talk freely with the magistrate if they're having any issues inside prisons. So, there are a number of safeguards that could be put in place, and CHRI has prepared a document on that. It's a working document. But yeah, so those safeguards are very much required. The Delhi High Court, Bombay High Court, they have issued some of these safeguards earlier, but I think this is really the high time to implement them in the right spirit. As regards the situation in other countries, there are some good practices, there are some bad practices. So for example, I'll start with UK. In UK, they've come up with 2 policy papers on clearly putting down the eligibility criteria for release, for assessment process, on monitoring and everything. But they have said it very clearly that anyone who falls into the eligibility criteria, it does not mean that the person will be released. So there's no right to be released here. And they have a very strict assessment criteria on whether the person should be released from prison or not. Another worrisome issue that has happened in UK is that about 3,500 prison staff have tested positive, which amounts to about 1/10 of their prison workforce. So that is a big challenge that they're facing. In Austria, they have started a 24-hour hotline by the psychological service department for prison staff and this has been well received by staff. So the staff will be able to talk about their challenges and psychological problems that they're facing during this time. In Germany, there are so they're following a strict 14-day quarantine for every newly arrived prisoner, which is a good thing, which I believe is not happening as much in India. And what Dr. Raghavan mentioned earlier, that yes, there is absolutely a need for having making some temporary arrangements, so that the new arrivals are not put inside prisons at once. Another bad practice which is seen in Germany is that they've provided the protective mask and protective equipment for the staff. However, they've not provided it to the prisoners who are working in close contact with the staff and who are helping the prison administration. They have good practices that they have extended the telephone hours, and they're also doing it. They're also supporting it financially. So they've reduced the cost of these communications. They are also involving prison population in production of protective masks, and this has also been done in India by many prisons in UP, Karnataka, and other states. So this is a good sign. In Netherlands and in Spain, the situation is that they're refusing release because there's shortage of electronic tagging equipment. So that's another issue altogether, and they're only releasing people when, if they have the available electronic tagging equipment. So it has its own problems. So that's another issue. The things are exceptionally bad in United States, where the new projections suggest that up to 1 lakh additional deaths due to COVID will occur throughout the USA unless significant reductions are made to prison populations. So US is specifically very, very bad, and they really need to take some bold steps right now. So, I think this has been an overall overview of what is happening all across, and I guess everyone is facing a lot of challenges, throughout the prison staff, the prisoners all across the world. And the point that Cecilia mentioned, I think another human rights violation which is taking place right now in prison is the lack of communication with lawyers. Which is not being taken seriously, and it is surprising that even the MHA advisory, which was issued on 2nd May, it does not mention about it. It does talk about stopping mulaqat with family and extending the telephone facilities and video conferencing facilities for meeting with the family, but they have completely skipped off about the communication with lawyers. So that is something which is a concern, and a lot of guidelines, the interim guidelines by WHO, there've been guidelines by the Penal Reform International. So all those guidelines talk about ensuring that prisoners should have access to legal counsel, especially at this time. But this is one problem in India, that this has not been taken very seriously. Also, on the lack of health facilities, so there's a positive obligation on states to ensure that prisoners are treated or are provided the same quality of health care as are provided to other members of the society. So there's clear lack of medical care, and this has been a challenge even earlier. There are no permanent medical officers in prisons. There's no enough paramedic staff or supporting nursing staff in prisons. So this has been a challenge, and I'm sure this must be more difficult at this time, especially for prisons like sub jails, where there are no permanent medical officers, and the doctors from local hospitals visit once a week or twice a week, which is quite problematic. So I think I would stop there, and I would want some time for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sugandha. As a moderator, it's always nice when the speaker doesn't exceed the time limit. Anyway, so I think what you have really highlighted is, one is the variation in the functioning of the high-powered committees across different states, and the fact that there is very little information available with regard to the functioning of the UTRCs, the under trial review committees. At least as far as HPC is concerned, minutes are made available and so gets an idea about what's happening. But when it comes to the under trial review committees, there is no information about how they are functioning.
Right.
The other important point you raised is the issue of when we use technology, are there any safeguards being taken? So, for example, if we are going to hold various kinds of hearings, court hearings through video conferencing, what minimum guidelines should be there to protect the rights of prisoners? You know, that is something that, and I'd just like to mention here, just for the benefit of everyone, is that there is a Bombay High Court ruling, Rajendra Bidkar and Suresh Shinde versus State of Maharashtra, in which Bombay High Court has issued detailed guidelines of how under trial should be produced before court through video conferencing. What are the minimum guidelines that should be followed? So maybe that guideline could be looked at a situation like this. The other thing that you really highlighted was the practices that are currently happening across the world in terms of the COVID crisis, and good and bad practices both is what you brought out. Finally, I think you very rightly talked about the lack of medical staff, inadequate medical staff across prisons, paramedics as well as medical officers, and its impact on an already worsening situation, and the issue of sub-jails. That's really a neglected issue. Nobody is talking about it, but there are people, I mean, our information is that now, because of the pandemic, there are more people being put in sub-jails now. Just one particular district where we did a fact finding, and we found that in, they were being kept in numbers like 50, 70, 90. In one sub-jail, there were 95 under trials in Pandharpur block of Solapur district, and overcrowded in small barracks. So these are the kind of challenges that we are now facing. I'm going to try and see if Krupa is back. Can the organizers tell me if she's back?
So, no, sir. She was here, but again we lost her network. She's not here now.
Is there any way by which she could talk on the phone, and that could aid?
Yes, sir. She could call me, and the same would be directed. Only the thing that voice might break. The audience might not get a clear voice. So I'm trying the same option. It would take around 2 or 3 minutes for me.
Okay. So what I would do is, and so that we don't lose time, we could take some of the questions which is there in the Q&A session. And so I would request all the panelists to come on their video. So there, Asha, if you could also join. Okay, Krupa is present via audio now?
No, sir, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So can I start with some of the questions?
Yes, sir. Till that time, yes.
Okay. Okay. I'll start. Okay. Now this is where one has to pick and choose, because there are so many questions that all of them can't be answered. We don't have time for that. There is a question about the issue of mental health of prisoners as well as children of prisoners left outside in the current situation. And maybe I could request Cecilia to talk about it, that whether anything is being done about this issue and what is the current situation. Others can also add.
Yeah. As far as the mental health situation of prisoners is concerned, nothing much is being done. Yeah. Even the normal activities that they used to be engaged in, say, for example, if it was some kind of a, some kind of employment, tailoring, any kind of industry that was set up in prison, a few days into the lockdown and everything has come to a standstill. Because there has been no supply of raw material and neither are they able to transport the finished goods. So even the limited number of prisoners who used to be engaged in those activities, currently they are not engaged. And strangely, one of the guidelines that was given to the prisons here was that any form of group activity within the prisons should stop. Now, that was a very bad move because the only other, at least if the prisoners were kept more positively engaged, say for example, giving them opportunities to come together, engaging them in any form of art, just colors, or there are so many who play different musical instruments and they just love having those gatherings. Even on a daily basis, that's a regular feature across all prisons. With that having stopped, it really is sad that opportunities like that are when they need to be enhanced, that is where it's totally stopped. And mental health of children outside the prisons where there is no family. I don't know if there are other institutions or organizations. I know some institutions and organizations have made an effort. I know Krupa, Prayas Baruch, Krupa and her team has done considerable work. India Vision Foundation has done a lot of work, but with a lot of other states and other places, I don't think those children really have been reached out to in this situation.
Thank you. There is another question about what's happening to people in beggars' homes. Well, that's a complete black hole as of now. There is no information available about what's happening in beggars' homes. In fact, in the intervention application that has been made by the National Forum on Prison Reforms, it has included that people in children's institutions, women's institutions, and beggars' homes and detention centers should be also looked at in terms of the directions being given by the Supreme Court. But apart from children's institutions, the courts have not really taken cognizance of this. So one really doesn't know in terms of whether arrests are still being made. If they are being made, are they being brought to the beggars' homes and things of that sort? Because anyway, the condition in these homes is quite bad. There's an interesting question about whether what is happening with regard to the process of adoption in terms of background check and follow-up. Are they on halt or are they continuing as normal? I don't know if any of the panelists would be, maybe Asha might be able to throw some light on that. Asha?
I missed that question.
In the process of adoption, whether background checks and follow-up, and are they all on halt, or what is happening to adoption?
Everything is on halt.
Everything is on halt. Okay.
Right now, everything is on halt.
Okay. Okay. Another question is about, again, this might go to Asha, is that when we are sending children home, is there an assumption that they are better off there?
No.
So that's an issue that I think you had also raised in your talk.
Yeah, but that was a time of time to take a decision, a lockdown period. So when the parents were called and whoever had parents had to be sent home because one had to decongest the institutional setting. That was the first priority.
Yeah, okay. And I think the Supreme Court has given an order that the CWC should be inquiring into the welfare of the child by making phone calls to the family.
And now they have started doing that.
Okay. One question about role of technology to provide prisoners access to family and legal aid. Sugandha, would you like to take this? Sugandha has to be unmuted.
What exactly is the question?
Use of or the role of technology to provide prisoners access to family and legal aid.
Yeah, so the MHA advisory, which was issued on 2nd May, very clearly says that mulaqats be stopped completely. And I mean, this they've done even, I mean, much earlier, even in March, this was done. And this has led to problems in many prisons because there was not proper communication with the prisoners themselves. So they have not really explained to prisoner what could be the repercussion, why they're stopping the mulaqats. And, you know, it's in most of the prisons, you know, there's always like we versus them kind of a situation more. So if anything that the prison staff does, and if it is not communicated properly, then there are chances that you know, that animosity to increase, and because they're not made properly aware about this. So I think it's very important to inform prisoners in a way that, in fact, they should be the ones who should say that, you know, let's stop mulaqat, because, you know, it's difficult for our families to travel, for, you know, for them to sit outside in big groups, it's not safe. So you know, we can do that on phones or video conferencing. But the other reality is also that the video conferencing facilities are there in limited prisons right now. Most of the central prisons and some district prisons would have, but it's not there throughout in all the prisons. So before stopping those mulaqats, it was important for them to ensure that these alternatives were in place, which Cecilia also mentioned that they have not really done that properly. So, of course, there can be a lot of role that technology can play in these communications. We've also been advocating for using video conferencing national business. So that's also very important, because generally in most of the prisons, prisoners are asked to pay for the calls that they make, and for foreign national business, it's very expensive since it's an ISD call. So we've been suggesting to a lot of prison departments that instead of phone calls, they should be allowed to communicate with their families and to their counselors and embassies through video conferencing. So technology can definitely play a role here, but we need to be better prepared.
Okay, thank you. There's
can I just add? Can I just
yes,
add
please,
yeah.
please. Yeah.
There is also a slight contention with the use of technology, because I think somewhere there's an assumption that a large number of prisoners' families will be in a position to use the video conferencing facility. But the truth being that a large number of prisoners, particularly those who belong to the rural communities, still do not have even what we, what everybody thinks is very common, phone for that matter. And in such a scenario, like video conferencing is a very, very far-fetched idea. So if there is a use of technology, like I mentioned, any kind of a rule or any kind of a guideline that comes, it's important to keep the last person in mind while designing it, and that is something that has not happened, because even video conferencing, even in normal times when we appear in court, we know for a fact that our clients do not have a clue of anything that's happening there in the court. And that's it's a set thing that, we will get back and explain. That is how video conferencing functions. So access to technology in a place, in a country like ours, is a big question mark. So, I mean, yeah,
very, very important. One little bit of future gazing, if both the panelists would, or all three of them would like to do, is one question is, what is going to be the post-lockdown situation of prisoners? Somebody has asked. And do they think that there are going to be changes in prison administration based on the lockdown experience?
I don't think the lockdown is going to change anything much. For anybody who has looked at the history of prison reforms, it literally hasn't changed from even it's like donkey's years now. I think we will celebrate lack of change. We'll celebrate like a centenary of lack of change in prisons. And I know I'm not exaggerating when I say that. But yes, I think what needs to change is the kind of effort that is put by civil society organizations. That kind of an intervention somewhere, I think it is important to pressurize the courts to make civil society intervention mandatory. I fear that post the lockdown, because the government is going to be so engaged with so many other commitments, and as usual, prisons or largely closed institutions are not going to get the kind of priority that they need to get. If not anything, it's only going to worsen, which is why it's important that we buck up to what is going to come in the days ahead.
Thank you. Sugandha, would you like to add something? And Asha then also?
I think it's important for us to not look at prisons in isolation, because a lot of problems that are there with the majority of the population which is under trials is mainly related, and they are in the judicial custody, so to say. And so I'm hoping that there would be better coordination in future, while now that they have experienced this, and there'll be better coordination between the legal services authorities with prison departments. I hope that the judicial magistrates would be little more liberal in granting bail, and especially for petty offenses, for people who know that the administration of justice would not get hampered. So I'm hoping that it brings about some change, but really difficult.
Yeah, interesting. Asha, you want to add something?
Yeah, just one point is to say that there's going to be a need for civil service organizations a lot more post-COVID scenario. But the question is, how many are going to survive this thing?
That's
how
true.
many of the civil social organizations are really going to survive this? Because all the funds that are coming in are going in for COVID response.
Yes.
And nobody wants to now support. And this is the last on the list for anybody, prisons, children, juvenile justice and all this, not even the realm of realm for the funding agencies today. So how many of us are going to, survive is a different question, because that's kind of a little bit scary.
True. There's a related question, but I mean, I thought I'll just, do you think investment in health would increase as a result of this in prisons, custodial institutions?
It should.
Health
Cecilia continues to be pessimistic, so it's okay.
No, even I'm actually looking at health, yes, but when you talk about prisons, or when you talk about I don't know, children may still be a little bit soft.
Okay.
Prisons, I don't know.
Okay.
Sir, I only hope on a daily basis, pray that with the way I see the pandemic progressing in Arthur Road Jail.
Yeah.
I only hope that the large number of deaths do not get accounted for from the prison. Yeah. Because we know for a fact that yes, of course, these people may have been taken to the hospitals and all of it. And all of us working in the sector are very well aware of how prisoners get treated, even in the regular hospitals when they go for their, other kind of checkups in normal circumstances. So that is an apprehension. But in terms of increase in the health budget, honestly, I'm not very optimistic.
Okay. Yeah. Then there's a question on accountability of the prison department with regard to even things like budgets that they don't utilize to the fullest extent. And I think this is a larger issue, which is not particularly related to the pandemic, and maybe outside the scope of today's chat. So because of the large number of questions, I'm letting it go. But there's another question about some clarification somebody wants about the provision of starting temporary jails under the Prisons Act. So just for clarification, that the Prisons Act allows the government to set up any structure as a prison. All they have to do is to notify that place that this is a prison. So already in Maharashtra, for example, in some of the districts, they have notified a few school buildings as temporary jails, though they haven't done it in the big cities where it is required more. This is one way by which overcrowding can be reduced for the time being, and social distancing can be made possible. For example, municipal schools are lying vacant. These could be used, and we could get support from home guards for providing security, etc. So some temporary measures could be done. Anybody wants to add to this on this issue of temporary jails?
No, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Whether civil society organizations can play a role, I think this question has already come in. I think civil society organizations today have become more active, but the system is, as of now, completely shut them out. They are not using their, the fact that they even have a good network of people with whom they can work together, collaborate. For example, home visits or to family members or making phone calls. There are a number of areas where civil society organizations can play an important role in at least reducing the stress levels of prisoners, I think. But somehow that doesn't seem. Yeah. Yes, Asha.
In fact, our project RCJJ is precisely doing that. I think even Prayas is doing the same thing, where we are reaching out to our clients and finding out how they're doing, and in case they require any assistance, we are, networking and providing it to them.
And
yes. Sorry.
What I think is very important for the civil society organizations to do post the lockdown is to advocate for. I know, for example, now Prayas is advocating for social workers in the criminal justice system, but the kind of resistance and kind of challenges along that way are immense, and it's going to take a long time to iron that out. It would be a good idea to tap the judiciary and to have it as a judicial mandate, because then your chances of being shut out, like right now, the government should have taken civil society organizations on board immediately, but they haven't even, they haven't even considered this being offered by multiple organizations. So I think to push for it to become a judicial mandate is very, very important post the lockdown.
Okay. There's a question on the status of elderly population with respect to bail and parole.
Sir, irrespective of which category of prisoners there are, unless and until you see, there are several factors that come into play when you talk about bail and parole. Now, bail compliances will completely depend on how much the family is able to coordinate with the lawyer in the existing circumstances and have that entire compliance through. Okay. Secondly, you are up against judges who believe that, who take a call to say that it's better that this person continues to be here rather than, being sent home, or where they say that this is not an urgent matter. I know colleagues of mine who haven't been able to push through with their bail petitions because judges have repeatedly said, and I have seen it myself, that this is not an urgent matter, so we will put it on hold. And as far as parole is concerned, yes, elderly people may have been granted parole, but how far their transportation, arrangement of sureties and things like that are concerned, I don't think those arrangements have been looked into. Not in several of the cases that I know here in Karnataka, I know the families have had to struggle to do that. And the administration hasn't done it.
Yeah. Yes, Sugandha, you can add. And in the meanwhile, I need to quickly get my charger because my computer is running out. So please continue.
So as regards the question on old prisoners.
Sugandha, can you speak up? I think your volume has gone down.
Hello, can you hear me?
It's mild, low, but yeah.
Can you hear me? Hello.
It's low, but we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. As regards senior citizens and old prisoners, so Haryana, Delhi, and Odisha particularly, the HPCs of these three states have taken into account the release of these prisoners, but with exceptions that there should not be an NDPS case, no POCSO cases. So with certain restrictions, but they are considering above 60 in Delhi and above 65 in Haryana and Odisha.
Okay, there is an important question about anything happening with regard to foreign nationals. Any efforts being made to help them in touch with their families or with regard to lawyers, etc. Would anybody like to answer that question?
No, sir, not that at least in Karnataka, I know that hasn't been possible. In fact, in some of the cases where colleagues of mine have tried to get them bail, there has been a complete refusal. You know, even in the most dire circumstances, there has been a complete refusal.
Sugandha, would you have any idea about this issue?
Communication? We know that Delhi, Himachal, and West Bengal, they do have a policy on extending video conferencing facilities for communication with families. So I'm hoping that they're able to continue doing that during this time. But none of the high-powered committees have particularly talked about foreign national prisoners. Yeah.
In fact, the Maharashtra HPC has debarred foreign nationals.
Yeah.
Being considered for release.
Yes, the same here also.
Yeah. One interesting anecdote is that in Baikala jail, the prison official informally requested the Prayas social workers to contact the families of some of the prisoners abroad to request them to send money order. But you know, so that was just like there might be some pecuniary gain involved in that case. Why it's happening, but in any case.
I think Krupa is back online, sir.
Okay, great. Krupa, are you back? Hello? She's muted actually.
No,
Organizers?
Yes, sir, I'm working on it.
Okay. So should I continue, and when she's on, you let me know?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Vinay, do we have a time bar here?
Ma'am, it was till 15:30. 3:30.
Yeah. So we have crossed 3:30. Shall we go on till another 10 minutes, or should we? What do you have to say?
Yes, sir. We can go with it. Since people have many questions.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Okay. There's another question on how do you prevent exploitation of prison labor, especially in the context of market-driven forces, like, for example, production of masks, which is going on a large scale in some of the prisons. Anybody would have any take on this issue?
Sir, in Karnataka, here in Bangalore, I know the women prisoners and also a few of the men prisoners and across other central prisons were very instrumental in supplying masks in huge numbers to all the prisons, to the government. And so when I asked some of my clients if they were being paid, they were told that this will be their contribution to the pandemic.
Oh.
So yeah, they didn't get paid.
Well, I also read in a newspaper that in some prisoners have donated their 1 day's wages or 1 month of wages.
Nasik also has done. Nasik also has done.
Yeah, for PM Cares. I often wonder how much of this is really, with consent. I would have questions about it.
Also, in Karnataka, we've seen that under trials are not paid at all, even if they are being employed for kitchen work, for other maintenance work in prisons.
Yeah.
And this is so in other states as well.
Yeah.
So they're not being paid otherwise. So I'm not sure if they're paid at this time, when they're involved in production of masks.
There is a very niche question. Yeah. There is a very niche question, which is, what is the impact on increase in domestic violence as a result of releasing of prisoners? I don't think anybody would have looked at this or studied this issue.
I'm sure there's a lot of research areas that will open up after the lockdown period, and you know, after we are done with this crisis. So this is added in that list.
Yeah. So it's an interesting question to look at. There's a question on somebody asking if can please shed some light on the situation of detention centers vis-a-vis the pandemic. So I'm assuming that we are talking about Assam here, the person who has asked this question, because that's what one means when we are talking about detention centers. Would anybody like to respond to this? If there's any, I only know that the Supreme Court has reduced the number of years from 3 years to 2 years, considering for those people who can be released from detention centers. In its same PIL, they have passed an order that people who have completed 2 years could be considered for release from detention centers. But beyond that, I'm really not, I don't think we have information on this.
And over the years that there has been considerable delays in repatriation of prisoners back to their home countries due to multiple levels of checks and reporting and everything. So this is particularly, I guess there'll be further delays, this is not definitely a happy situation for foreign nationals who are detained in detention centers.
There's one last question, which is, what are the challenges in securing budgetary increase for children's institutions? I don't think it's connected, but yet, why not try and maybe Asha can shed some light on this.
Even during non-COVID days also, there was this huge demand to increase and it was not happening. So now I don't know what the priority will be or how it is going to be.
Yeah. So I think we have come to the end of all the questions that were put up here. I am going to make one last attempt to see if Krupa can come in and say a few words at least.
Vinay?
No, sir. So it's not possible. We have this network issue. So it won't be possible for her to join us today, but we could do it in the future.
Okay. Okay. So it's unfortunate that this technology has reached us, but at least we could see her. Krupa has, I'll just in 2-3 lines, I'll try to summarize maybe because I'm aware of the work that she has been doing. So basically as part of Prayas, which is located, Bharuch is one of the districts where we work. The Bharuch District Legal Services Authority approached Prayas to say that we would like to take your help, see if those families who are being released, those prisoners who are in prison and their families are outside, whether we could provide some rations and supplies to these families. So Prayas, along with the DLSA provided the vehicle, and they also provided one paralegal volunteer and the Prayas team. They went around 3-4 days to all the different talukas and the villages and provided rations to family members of prisoners who had requested for some kind of a help. Through this exercise, one came to know that the situation of prisoners' families is really bad. And this is something that has come out from our work as well in Mumbai and Thane. So across the 3 districts where we have been working, this is one issue that has come up, in fact, about also Latur, for example, and Solapur, where we have some information about the situation. Prisoners' families, most of whom work in informal sector, daily wage earners, agricultural labor, they are all in a very bad situation because of the pandemic. And there was much more that Krupa could have shared with us, but largely she was going to talk more about the situation of families of prisoners. So we'll probably get to hear her on some other occasion. I really want to thank the speakers today, Cecilia, Asha, and Sugandha. And Krupa is back.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Hello, Krupa. Krupa.
Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, there would be an option to join audio, so you'd be able to hear us. Join audio. It would be on the left side, lower section, lower bar. Join audio. Or if you're using a mobile, then it would be on the upper bar.
Krupa, can you hear us? Hello?
So we lost her connection again.
Again. Hello? One last try.
Yes, sir.
No, I think we've lost her.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So that's like, it was like a glimmer of hope, and then she's gone again. So I was just thanking everybody, Cecilia, Sugandha, and Asha, for their very, very insightful comments. I've attended 3-4 other webinars, but I found this one to be more meaningful, because a lot of time for speakers to talk about their views, and that has really helped us to have a more relaxed one, rather than 7 minutes and 8 minutes and quickly close, and that kind of a thing has not been there. So, and I also would like to thank the organizers, the CCJ Forum, for taking the efforts to organize this webinar, and hope that they are able to do more in future. Thank you so much. If the organizers would like to say something, then
Yes.
I would hand it.
Yes, sir. So the CCJ Forum would like to thank all the panelists for giving us their valuable time and sharing the insights on the current situation of prisoners, prison, children protection, and correction home during the pandemic. It was a huge learning experience for all of us. We'd also like to thank Professor Vijay Raghavan for moderating this webinar. Thank you. Thank you, Asha ma'am. Thank you, Sugandha ma'am. Thank you, Cecilia ma'am. Finally, we would like to thank each and everyone present here for making this event a success. We hope to host you all again in the future events of CCJ Forum. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.